I'm gonna take it back, but I'm gonna pause.
I'm with Mid-Columbia Fisheries Enhancement Group, and just really glad you're all here. It's nice to see this great turnout for our winter speaker series. We began these talks during the pandemic as a way to just connect and share information, and we've enjoyed them and they've been popular, so we continued them. Mid-Columbia Fisheries is a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting and restoring wild salmon populations, their habitats, and ecosystem functions through restoration, protection, education, and community involvement throughout our region. We have a big region. We work on the tributaries to the Columbia upstream of Bonneville Dam up to the Kittitas-Chelan County line. So the Wind, the White Salmon, the Klickitat Rivers, Rock Creek, and the Yakima River, and other smaller tributaries. And we're part of a statewide network of regional fisheries enhancement groups. We have a few board members and staff here with us tonight. If you are on our board and or staff and it's easy for you to turn your camera on and raise your hand, do that so we can just see you. Merritt, raise your hand. You're on our staff.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Okay. There's our people. Thanks for coming. Before we start, a bit of housekeeping. We'll have time for questions and answers after the presentations. We have two presentations tonight. Bill Sharp first about tributary confluences, and then Joe Blodgett and Mike Ritter about Bateman Island. You can put your questions in the chat and we'll have time for questions and answers at the end, but we're going to go through the presentations first. We're going to keep everybody muted during the presentations, but we'll unmute you at the end. You might also have to unmute yourself. And if you called in on the phone, just mute yourself too. I think most people know how to use Zoom by now, but if you want to change the view from gallery, where you're looking at everybody, to presenter of just who's talking, that's nice for the presentations. On my screen, the options at the top under view. So we have one more talk in our winter speaker series. That's on March 5th, Waders to Weed Management, Training the Next Generation of Conservationists with Merritt Mitchell, there's Merritt, and Chelsea Trout from Pacific Education Institute. So tonight's talk, why you're all here, Middle Columbia River, possible actions to improve fish habitat. It's my big honor to get to introduce our speakers, Joe Blodgett, Bill Sharp, and Mike Ritter. Joe Blodgett is an enrolled member of the Yakima Nation and has served for 5 years as the project policy coordinator for Yakima Nation, Yakima Klickitat Fisheries. Joe is excited about his work at Yakima Nation Fisheries Department and what the department is doing. And he says that he's honored to continue the legacy of efforts that were started by past leadership. Joe started at Yakima Nation in 1989, just the other day, as a fish culturalist and later as a hatchery manager. Last year, Joe retired from serving as the head coach of the Wapato Girls High School basketball team, where he served for years and enjoyed getting to know the young people and having an impact on them and creating a positive atmosphere. He's still a big supporter of the Wapato Wolves, and so should you. Bill Sharp is a research scientist for Yakima Nation Fisheries. For over 3 decades, Bill has assisted the tribe's efforts to honor, protect, and restore the natural and cultural resources that have sustained the Yakima people since time immemorial. Bill has constructed many habitat restoration projects and several large capital infrastructure projects to improve fish passage and help reform hatchery practices. And last but not least, Mike Ritter has worked for Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife since 2008. Mike is the statewide technical lead for wind and solar projects. Mike has been actively involved in the Yakima Delta project for a decade. And prior to working for WDFW, Mike worked for other state, federal, and territorial wildlife agencies. Thank you, Mike, Bill, and Joe for joining us and sharing your time and expertise with us. And thanks for everyone else for Zooming in. we're glad you're here this evening, and we appreciate your interest in this important topic. So with that, we can get started. Bill, you are up first.
No, you're muted if you're talking. I was just fumbling around while on mute.
Fumbling
Okay.
on silence, in silence.
Okay.
So we're not seeing the slideshow view yet. So at the top,
Okay.
click on slideshow.
Okay. We practice this from the beginning. No luck still?
Right now, we're still seeing the regular view with the slides on the side.
Okay. Man, we just got done doing
It
this.
worked so well during our practice.
Yeah.
Can you just go to the bottom of the screen and touch on the, what do you call it? The screen, the like the old roll down.
I don't know, but Bill, go across to slideshow and then from the beginning one more time.
Yep.
Why
Yeah.
is that not working?
Go right down where it says notes and comments on the bottom of your presentation,
Yeah. So I apologize, folks.
and then touch the icon right next to the minus sign.
So for some reason, pardon me.
No
What do you,
worries, Bill. We'll get
what-
there.
do you see anything now? Same view?
Yeah.
Same view. Oh,
So what's the word that says resume slideshow in the middle of the upper left or the upper left of the
Yep, there you go.
cover page?
It's right there. Thank you, Dave. It's right there at the upper left-hand corner of your image there.
Okay, pardon me.
we can see it. Maybe you can't see it.
I can't see it. So
Yeah. Let me see. I downloaded your slides, so let me find them.
pardon me.
And why don't you just close out and try to come back in? Let's see if that helps.
Close
Although
it out
Margaret, I
again.
guess, is going to get them.
Well, I've got Bill's slides, so
You got 'em.
let me see if I can share them.
So let me give it one more try, Margaret.
Okay.
Oh, I don't know what's going on now. So no luck.
All right. Let me try it. Thanks for your patience, everybody. Okay. All right. Okay, how's that look for everyone? Okay.
Good.
All right, take it away, Bill.
Okay. Hey, thanks. Sorry about that.
No
Yeah,
worries.
appreciate this, Merritt and Margaret, for setting this up for us. Bill Sharp with the Yakima Nation Fisheries Program. Yeah, I want to chat with folks about some of the important work that's happening down in Zone 6, which is Bonneville to McNary, and the cold water refuge work. We're working with our federal partners and some of the 6 sovereigns. So I'll talk about some of the studies completed to date and possible actions and next steps. Next slide, please. So, I work for the Yakima Nation. I always like to insert this slide. This is why we do what we do. Our tribal elders told us to, honor, protect, and restore, and try to make things as beneficial as possible to the tribal people. And part of that treaty right is having those fish there to catch and harvest so they can practice their traditional ceremonial and subsistence fisheries. And that's why we do what we do. Next slide. So, as folks know, the impounded Columbia has detrimental impacts to the Columbia River and these tributaries. Historically, about 16.4 million cubic tons of sediment per year hit the Columbia plume. Despite all the anthropogenic influences now, only about 8 million tons of sediment reach the Columbia. Uh, and a lot of it is trapped behind the Columbia dams and impounding these tributary deltas where we see warming and shallow water habitat and areas, these sediment fans that have increased predation. Next slide. So with that and the looming impacts of an increasing and warming Columbia River, there are many, many factors that are stressing our anadromous fish. These simple habitats, again, are uh, that ramp up and down with hydro system. We see desiccation of lamprey. We see stranding of juvenile fish. These warm, shallow areas are conducive for warm water fish and avian predators. And sometimes these thermal dams create situations where fish can't get into places they need to get. The prolonged exposure over time leads to mortality or loss of spawning fitness. And as folks recall, back in 2015, more than half the sockeye returning to their upper reaches were lost. Here's a shot of them in Drano, which was a cold water refuge where they went into and unfortunately could not get out of. The Columbia was too warm then. So next slide. This is kind of a busy slide, but folks should take a look at this afterwards. But it's basically is prepared by Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, the temperatures between 1940 to 1921, or excuse me, 2021, and what some of this small print will show you is that we're seeing sort of an typically during this later period, the 47 days when temperatures really hit that thermal condition where fish would seek refuge. We're seeing that expand on either end. There's been August 14th, 15th of 2021, we had record temperatures back then. Likely some additional ones since then, but we are, as folks see, have been seeing a warming Columbia River, making these cold water refuges more and more critical. So these fish can hopscotch their way upstream. Next slide. In 2021, the Environmental Protection Agency, John Palmer's team for Region 10, created this report, the Columbia River Cold Water Refuges Plan, where they identified about 13 primary cold water refuges from the Cowlitz River upstream to the Deschutes. And they identify those as cold waters that are 2 degrees or excuse me, 4 degrees or cooler as they meet the Columbia River. Those are the primary ones. And some of the Sandy and the Deschutes showed there in green are the between 2 and 4 degrees Celsius during that August summertime temperature. Many of these, as you can see, are within Zone 6 and in the Columbia Gorge region. Next slide. Kind of a fuzzy slide there, picture from the cold water refuge report, but it shows the stocks that are primarily use these, which are the summer steelhead and fall chinook, where they'll tuck in and cool off as they migrate up. Again, leapfrogging their way up from one to the other. Some recent reports indicate that coho might be using these as well, as they're experiencing on that tail end in the late summer months, that those conditions that they need to find these colder pockets as well. And sockeye, you can see there, they migrate sooner and hopefully are out of harm's way, but that obviously wasn't the case in 2015 as they attempted to migrate up to the Wenatchee, Osoyoos, and Yakima rivers, and over into Idaho as well. Next slide. This is a table within that report identifying those key cold water refuges from the Cowlitz on upstream. And this table shows the plume itself as measured and cubic meters of cold water plume, and then the contributing watershed and cold water area there. Some of these places obviously have, like, look across over down here at the Little White Salmon. As we all know, that has a waterfall not too far up. So the stream cold water refuge volume coming in has limited access as for these adult salmon. Next slide. This is here's a picture of the Wind River from that report, and I pulled out these tributaries in the Bonneville Pool that as ranked by volume of cold water and the temperature differential. So you can see we have several of these key ones right there. Obviously, Little White Salmon with that cold water volume and how it's corralled by the highway and railroad there really does a good job of providing that cold water benefit for upstream migrants. This table shows, the Bonneville Pool, the 46 miles of pool, and the tributaries that are cold water pockets that we need to maintain and hopefully enhance. The Wind River on the picture there, you can see an August temperature and some of the bright red warm water from that shallow river left side of the stream that is shallow water, lots of sediments, and a lot of solar input there to diminish that cold water plume coming out of the wind and create some poor conditions for particularly adults and likely getting more impactful into the future. So these are some of the areas we're looking at to see what are the options there, what are some things that can be done, either dredging and deepening or essentially taking it out of play by filling it and putting in riparian uplands, or in potentially in this case a boat launch. Actually, Skamania County is looking at that. And down below you can see some of the temperature stress levels and some of the impacts that with exposure over time. And again, these is so critical in a warming climate to do what we can to protect and enhance these areas. Next slide. Just a shot of Herman Creek, one that folks probably drive by on the interstate, don't even know it's there, but it's number 6. It's really important. It has some, again, that opportunity to corral some of that cold water. Next slide. So over the last several years, we've been under the Resilient Columbia Basin Agreement. The Biden administration put together that opportunity for the Columbia River and really diving into efforts to bolster the salmon populations. We've been, over the last couple of years, we've been meeting every 2 weeks with our 6 sovereigns and talking about cold water refuges. And there's several reports out. In the lower right-hand side, you can see the salmonrecovery.gov and where some of these reports are. I hope folks can have an opportunity to look at that. But so the USG equals EPA, NIMS, and the Corps of Engineers, and the 6 sovereigns are Oregon, Washington, and the 4 lower Columbia River Treaty tribes. This effort is really dialed into identifying these cold water refuges, um, looking at some of the opportunities to upstream where we can you know try to maintain those cold water refuges um, through riparian work and protection of riparian forests and recreating the sponge as we do on the Klickitat and the headwaters to try to preserve those cold waters, enhance those cold waters, as we know we're going to be seeing less of those into the future. We have also have been working with the Corps of Engineers on a project I'll touch base on here shortly. But through that, we're working through the Water Resources Development Act, and we've been pretty successful in getting the Corps to partner with us. And their main authority within the Columbia Zone 6 is for commercial navigation. As you can see down the bottom of that right-hand box, we're looking at ecosystem projects with them now in some of these tributaries. So next slide. So the project we just wrapped up over after 2 years, several of folks on the phone were at the planning charrette we had, and which kicked things off back in 2022. And we focused on these three tributaries, the Wind, White Salmon, and Klickitat, working with the Portland District and members of the division on this project. Next slide. So the focus was to gather existing data, all the various sources, look at where we could find turbidity data, any kind of suspended sediment data, which was challenging to find, fish information, bathymetry, et cetera. And then looking at where we have stream gauges, where we need stream gauges, where they've been sort of out of commission, and through this project we were able to reinitiate the one on the Wind. We added turbidity to the Klickitat and White Salmon, and we are going to be installing some temperature data, and some of those things I believe are already in place. I'll have to go back and check, but and there was some physical measurements by the core team to look at the Wind, for example, and look and cross-check that with EPA's modeling efforts and some of their in situ measurements. Next slide. So this report does a really good job of looking at the whole, the geomorphic assessment from, a visual sense, looking at how these deltas were shaped and how they functioned pre-Bonneville. Here you can see the Wind. We have this for the Wind, Klickitat, and White, but you can see, a pretty well-defined channel, some sandbars and things like that you see there at the mouth. And then in 1969, with the inundation, the logging activity is still well underway there. And recent aerial photography shows, the sediment impacts out there in the delta and in the plume. Next slide. So, this delta assessment again was to get the historical context of how the Bonneville Pool and previous flood events have affected these sediment plumes and habitats. Characterize the physical conditions and establish those monitoring locations. So we'll build off of this as we move into a general investigation study looking at ecosystem function with the Corps, and the Klickitat, Wind, and White will sort of be the example as we move forward on the other deltas that are all within the Corps' authority to now look at, thanks to us updating the modifying the word of language, which you can do every 2 years. There's a way to get engaged with that and modify that to bring in projects that you, the tribe, others deem necessary. And as you see down below, one of the core Corps of Engineers' big deal is seeing how these sedimentation does impact the federal navigation channel. That is their primary concern in Zone 6 is, that commercial navigation. Are these deltas, the wind and the white salmon, Klickitat, are they getting into the shipping channel? And that's of concern to them. Next slide. So partners at CritFic had connections with the NOAA Office of Coast Survey, and in 2022 we started some bathymetry coverage. The navigation maps beyond the core for sort of recreational boating. Those were 1953 era maps that are woefully outdated. So with the connection to the Office of Coast Survey, we brought them down and they've started some bathymetry work. That lower left-hand side there is the story map where you can go in and see these images. Next slide. Here's an example of the Klickitat, what it shows. And what's really surprising to me is, as you look at this, is there's very, very limited, bedrock anymore. All of this reach here is essentially a sandbox with water on top. And you can see the big sand waves over here in red. And as it shallows up along the Oregon side, some of those are 10, 15, 20 feet high. So it's really telling that our juvenile fish in particular, as they migrate across here and out and through, have very, very limited complex habitat anymore. Next slide. Here's the Hood River, again, showing a similar situation. This boat could only get into about 20 feet of water, and they used their side scan sonar to develop these maps. So to get into the shallows, the next slide, we folks at CritFic had connections at Oregon State University, and we also had Cayuse Native Solutions come and do some LiDAR on the lower Klickitat. And then we stitched all this information, which will be beneficial to us to understand over time, how do these deltas interact with various flows from the Columbia? The next slide, please. And so this is hodgepodge is basically the tracks of the various surveys that happened from 22, 23, and 24, and how things have changed. And in the lower left, you can see Bonneville flows, and what's really telling is the 2024 flow was very minimal, not high at all, hardly a freshet as all that you would see, characterize down the Columbia. So we saw the delta nose sort of moving about 50 meters further into the Columbia. So it obviously points that the Columbia flows are critical to understand how these things are shaped and formed. And if there were some activities there, how do you protect your structures if you'd built a riparian forest upland, or what are your reoccurring maintenance intervals to make that the habitat conditions that you hope to achieve. Next slide. So this, I think, basically says the same things, with a little bit more detail, but again, in 2024 we had a weaker freshet than 22 and 23. So next slide. And then the folks at Coastal Margin Observation and Prediction, CMOP, which is now a division within CritFic, those guys are instrumental in doing this mapping and modeling, and they use this 3D technique to identify a composite of flows. 3D essentially gives you a good sense of where the channels are, where they move to, and how things change over time. Next slide. Another key thing that came out of this collaboration with CritFic and others is we partnered with University of Washington, and they came up with the Thor model, thermal history of regulated rivers. And what they use is Landsat data from the early 80s, and they can go back and use that and identify surface water temperatures to a pretty tight degree. And if you Google Thor, University of Washington, folks can get into that model and play. It covers quite a bit of the Columbia Basin, and how that model will be used over time. I think it has a lot of applicability as we look at fish migration over time and what kind of conditions they may have hit in a period where we know they were stopped 2015. What are those kind of temperature inputs from the snake or the upper Columbia that sort of brought that on, and set ourselves up to understand what could we be looking at with similar conditions coming into this into the adult migration season. Next slide. So sort of how did the Yakima Nation get engaged in this and started thinking about it? As folks know, in October 26th of 2011, they punched a hole in Condic Dam and started taking it out. And that then led to the sediment filling in the Underwood and Loose site in the Nemit Village area there on the lower White Salmon. This is a tribal in-loose site, village site, very important to the Yakima people. And the Pacific Corps, all the folks knew that this would happen, and that there was mitigation funds set aside to reestablish as much as practical and what we could that tribal navigation to that site. And then, as folks there locally know, there was the bit of the Condit Beach that started riverward of Highway 14, Highway 12, and then most of that has sort of pushed down along the Washington shore towards Spring Creek. But lots of things to consider there, and so we partnered with Interfluve. Next slide. And really took our time to assess how do we go about restoring this navigational channel while doing sort of an ecosystem lift to this shallow, broad mud flat that ramps up and down and strands fish, desiccates lamprey. And it was kind of challenging. We were dealing with the Seattle District of Corps of Engineers, and we took our time to really understand how things are going to react and what pool elevations meant to the exposed land and how best to, so again, take some of this out of play and provide an ecological lift. Next slide. Yeah, here's a shot of right before we began the dredging project to reestablish the boat basin there. So, next slide. So again, with Interfluve, we did some cross sections here to understand how the floodplain reacted at various pool elevations, and while we did this research and getting this physical information, a few little wetland plants started to emerge. Corps of Engineers was, a bit worried that we were going to impact a wetland. It took us about an additional year to walk through and talk through this, that these types of wetlands are detrimental. As you ramp up and down, you strand fish and desiccate lamprey, you create a warm water situation, and we think we can do this better. So next slide. So we took a look and basically evaluated how many cubic yards of material would we be able to pull from the boat basin, knowing we didn't want to hit native soil or native material at the bottom for cultural reasons. So we are excavating mostly sands at this point. But what we tried to do was build up and take out of play by elevating things about 4 feet or more, and to create a riparian upland. Next slide. So work was underway. Gosh, I should have put a date on this. Can't exactly remember when it was, but over the winter months, we started January 2nd. We had some low water pool at Bonneville and really went after it, and basically dredged about 14,000 cubic yards and brought it up on that shallow sandbar upstream. And it primarily was all sands. Next slide. And while we were doing that, revegetating it was really important, not only for again stabilizing the soils and taking that area out of play, but also to meet our 401 clean water certification and permit. So this is not your sort of typical Corps of Engineers heavy riprap boat basin. We used river cobbles, as you can see there in upper left, to sort of mimic natural conditions. And it's interesting, in the spring, you can see newly emergent fry using that habitat in this back basin. And we essentially took out of play about 5.5 to 6 acres of riparian forest, rather than ramping up and down and maybe burping a little methane. We've now maybe sequestered some carbon and have a well-established riparian forest there. I'll have to credit Jeanette Burkhart. She's the master at revegetation. She got workforce crews out there doing a fantastic job. We really wanted to hit it hard and get plant growth going, so we irrigated that first season and to get our materials down to the water table. And then again, we just recently, last year, I think we passed our review for 401 certification with great amount of regrowth. Next slide, Margaret.
I already forwarded. Is this the one? Are you ready, or you want the next
Well,
one?
I think yeah.
Okay.
I'm rapid fire here. And conceptual of what Klickitat might look like if we built some riparian forest there. So next slide. And as folks know, particularly upriver from us, these harmful algal blooms are a real thing and happening, and more frequently, something that I know the tribal fishers are mindful of, and we all need to be aware of. We see this as a problem that we should all be mindful of. Next slide. And I mentioned too the predation piece. At the Klickitat Delta with the USGS, we did a 2-year study where we tagged wild steelhead and some hatchery coho, and we call this the predator gauntlet, as they have to navigate that reach of the backwater, the Klickitat out to the Delta, and our host of predators there. Next slide. I guess one of the takeaways here is the Omicus estimates of about almost half of our wild steelhead are lost on the way to Bonneville, and through the Delta it's about 20%. So there's a real predation issue there with warm water predators as well as avian predators. This is where we want to do additional work and study things more in depth and really fine tune where these areas of predation hotspots are. Next slide. Chamberlain Lake, is that really needed? Is that a place where maybe we can cut that off from warm water predators accessing back to the Columbia? Something to take a look at. Is that an opportunity for dredge spoils from the Klickitat? Next slide. Here's sort of a bright light. I think, in that region, these tributaries here with the recent sales and all the private timber grounds that are now in active management, but in a good way. Just recently, Columbia Land Trust has purchased development rights from large tracts of this conservation fund. Some of these lands are now coming over to the Forest Service in the white salmon. So our tributaries in this neck of the woods on the Washington side I'm feeling good about the protection. In the headwaters of the Klickitat, we have a project underway now to try to repatriate about 10,000 acres of that checkerboard up there where we can get in and do active management under a large landscape and recreate that headwater sponge. Next slide. I think that is, and this is from our chairman, and it really hits home the message. And so sorry about the glitch at the beginning, but thank you, Margaret, for fixing that, and I'll pass it on to my colleague.
Wow, Bill, thank you. You had some amazing slides. I have a bunch of questions. I'll hold them to the end. So Merritt, are you going to run the slides for the Bateman? All right.
All right, you guys ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, Joe. Joe's coming up.
Here I
somewhere.
am.
All right, there we go. Well, thank you everyone for having us, and a special thanks to Margaret for inviting us. Joe and I are going to give you just a few slides, talk to you about the Bateman Island project, or better known as the Yakima Delta Restoration. Bill did an awesome job of describing low flows at tributaries, sedimentation, temperatures, predators, and it's all the same thing here in the Tri-Cities at the Yakima Delta where it dumps into the Columbia River. A little history about in 2010, Mid-Columbia Fisheries acquired some funding, worked with the Benton Conservation District, and kicked off this project to kind of understand more about the ecology of the Delta. That's when I became involved with it as a local person, WDFW, living here in the Tri-Cities, became engaged in the project. And what we have is the lower right picture gives you an image of just after, well, the causeway on the south side of Bateman Island, the Yakima River flowing in from the left, and the Columbia kind of on the diagonal there on the right. And you can kind of see all that kind of cloudy water there. That's a lot of the sediment that's coming in. And our project that we're working on in partnership with the Yakima Nation as a non-federal sponsor, along with the Corps of Engineers, is to remove that causeway to get a flow around the south side of the island. Joe, anything to add here on this?
Well, yeah, I'll give you some history on what we do at the Yakima Nation Fisheries. And when the YKFP was formed, the Yakima Klickitat Fisheries Project, which Bill is part of, we have an all stocks initiative. So we want all stocks returned back to be self-sustaining and harvestable in both the Yakima and the Klickitat Basin. And that played right along with when the Yakima Basin Integrated Plan came along. They also have a goal of having all the stocks healthy and harvestable. So with that, we monitored a lot of the issues in the Yakima Basin and found a lot of the trouble spots. And so we're aware of what's causing a lot of our fish mortality. And now it's time to go in there and fix it. Mike talked a lot about the history of how we got here, but a little history on the causeway is it was built about 85 years ago by a farmer that wanted to get out to that island and use it for his needs, and which was grazing at that time. So it was never permitted. It was never designed to be in that area. So it never passed fish. So all of the fish that would come down normally and turn to the right when they reach this area were blocked. And not only were they blocked, but it caused this big stagnant area of water, which over the years with the management of the way the Yakima River works now, it's a lot slower moving. It's a lot less water than what normally was 100 years ago. It heats up. And when it heats up, it causes a lot of issues for our smolts as they migrate out and some of our adults when they return. This is a key spot that we've discovered with a lot of our monitoring. It's heavily populated with predation. We have smallmouth bass just sit down there and wait to ambush. It also creates thermal barriers for any adults that are returning in the later parts of the summer, so sockeye salmon and summer Chinook. It also is a great place to grow a lot of the algae that Bill talked about and the stargrass and different scenarios like that. So it's created a real big hot spot for us to go after. Initially, we were after it because this area is traditionally important to the Yakima tribe and the Umatilla tribe. It was a place for trading. It was a village site, and it has a lot of significance to us. And to see it go the way it went, our cultural folks years ago, 25 years ago, asked for this removal. It didn't go anywhere. We've started to gain momentum now, and we're happy to report that we're on a good track now. So I think that's all I wanted to add on this slide, Mike.
Very good. Let's move to the next one. So I think we've already touched on some of these. Just draw your attention there to the sockeye mortality picture there on the right. A lot of native stargrass there, low flows, high temperature, middle of the summer. But the main thing here is to restore the ecology in the Yakima Delta, get some flows going through there. As Joe just mentioned, and those of you that are familiar with, the Yakima Delta is at the extreme, what would you call it, eastern downwater end of the whole Yakima Basin. And so we need to open this area up, get the water flowing, get the temperatures down, and it will support a basin-wide salmon recovery efforts that the Yakima Nation and others have been working so hard on way up in the Yakima. We want that cool flow from the Columbia to come around to Bateman Island there, do a lot more mixing, remove some of those sediments. Joe was right on with that improved salmon migration, both upstream and downstream. The one of the slides that Bill showed about when the water gets warm, we have all kinds of toxins. Joe mentioned it. It just seems like every year now in the summer, it's stagnant, it's pea soup green, and there's health warnings all over. Don't even go in the water. Another big one that I'm not sure if we have it on here. Yes, we do. Mosquitoes. The mosquito district. We're talking about a Delta area that's right in the heart of the Tri-Cities. Hundreds of thousands of people, lots of recreating, and we've got, I don't know, it's worse than bathwater warm and mosquitoes everywhere. So I'll leave it up to Joe for the cultural. He mentioned the cultural resources, but that's more for him to talk about, and the recreational opportunities. A lot of people fish down there, but it's difficult in the summertime to fish when things get so stagnant. Go ahead, Joe. Anything else?
Yeah, well, we talked earlier about the All Stocks Initiative, and a lot of the species that we have in the Yakima, pretty much all of the fish are in trouble, but a few of them have gone locally extinct. They're extirpated from our basin, including sockeye. And the reason for sockeye issues in the Yakima mainly were due to the blocking of the reservoirs where they need to go up and spawn. Sockeye go above reservoir, spawn, and then rear in those lakes for a year or two and then migrate back out. Well, we've completely blocked those to manage them for agriculture over the years, but with the integrated plan and the year WEP and everything that's going on in the basin, the Bureau of Reclamation's agreed to open passage for all of the reservoirs and allow fish to move up and down out of those things. And so with that, we've started an aggressive reintroduction effort of the sockeye salmon. We're taking sockeye from the Columbia River, putting them in the Cle Elum Reservoir. They're going up and spawning, very successful. That project's been very, very successful in getting the fish to spawn and rear. We'll have a helix system to fish passage up there, hopefully next year, to allow those fish to migrate out of there volitionally. But with that, we were encouraged that we would have some of these sockeye returning. And the Yakima system was once the second highest producer of anadromous fish to the entire Columbia Basin. and a lot of it was attributed to the sockeye population, but we also have summer Chinook and fall Chinook and that spawn in the lower Yakima River and rely on that area to be successful. This picture that we saw here happened this year. That thermal block set up because of that delta and the stagnant water, the water temperature got too hot for them to pass. So they sit out there in the Columbia River, waiting for the temperature to drop. Once it dropped a couple degrees, they thought they could make it up. They made it to the mouth, and overnight, the stargrass just completely took all the oxygen out of the system. And there were observed 70 steelhead that were dead along or above. We don't know how many were below the surface that we didn't see, but it was pretty frustrating to see those fish do everything they were supposed to do, come back and be blocked by this artificial barrier that's there. So it's something we're excited about on the process we're in now. As far as the cultural resources that are here, that's something that our cultural team works tirelessly on protecting. And it is an important area, and we just want to make sure that everybody keeps that in mind as we move forward on this progress. Next slide.
All right, just this slide and one more. As I told you or mentioned, we've been kind of piecemealing this project here since 2010, and the last, I think since 2019 or 2018, 2019, as you can see on the graph there, we formally requested the Corps of Engineers to accept this project as part of their ecological restoration program or continuing authorities program, and they said yes. And we've gone through the feasibility study phase. WDFW was the non-federal sponsor with the Corps. We are now in the design and implementation phase where WDFW and the Yakima Nation are the non-federal sponsors. The Corps is still the federal sponsor. And we're meeting regularly and we're moving along and we're adjusting to the new administration. And, we, as you can see on, I think it says somewhere on here that we hope could be implemented. Where does it say? Somewhere? Construction could begin as early as fall of 2025. Sorry, I was looking on the figure, not on the next steps. But we're really excited. It's been a long process, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of great science, but the science has been consistent. Warm water, poor flows, high temperatures, impact salmon, big time. I'll leave it at that for Joe to finish this off.
Okay, and yeah, you can see all the steps that we've gone through, and we want to make sure that this is done right. There were a lot of issues that were brought up during the feasibility of this. There's access to the island, there's fire protection, there's sediment, what's in the sediment as we pull that thing out. So that was tested, and it came back where there was nothing alarming in the sediment. So that was encouraging. We're going to look at scenarios without the fire protection and all these other issues that people have brought up. But we've worked hard to get to this point, to get to stay on track. The YKFP is co-managed by the Yakima Nation and WDFW. So along with that co-management, we just thought it would be great to co-sponsor this project with the Corps. So the Corps needs us as co-sponsors. They have cap. They're only allowed to spend a certain amount on this project. After that amount, then it's up to the co-sponsors to pick up the rest of the funding. And we were really successful of going out and securing some funding from our passage opportunities, and the state's done some great work and got some funding through the integrated plan. And we're excited that we're to this point. But like Mike said, there were some delays with all federal activity once the new administration's set up. So with those delays, we're hopeful that it doesn't cost us a year. We're hopeful that we can still stay on track and get this pushed through starting in December of 25 and get this final construction part of it underway.
And with that, we go to the final slide, which is our partners, and it's huge. This is a real team group effort, and thank you for listening to us.
Yeah, this definitely cannot be done. I mean, we've been trying for 25 years, along with the Umatillas, to convince the need of removing this causeway. I know that Mike's been working on this project for quite a few years, and we needed this collaborative effort. And when we come together, a big part of it was the integrated plan, but a lot of these folks were there before the integrated plan even was developed. And with that collaboration, we're starting to see a lot of progress. So yeah, thank you. And we tried to keep it short. I worked with Bill Sharp for a lot of years. I knew his presentation would go for a majority of the time. So no, I'm just kidding, Bill, but really appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk today.
Thank you, Mike and Joe. That was really interesting. It's exciting that the project might actually get started in 2025. It's been a long road to this point. So questions from the audience? I see a high five from Mel. Thanks, Mel.
And don't hesitate to put them in the chat as well if that's easier for you.
Yeah, you probably have to unmute to ask a question.
Yeah, I'm looking for a way to raise a hand here, and I'm not seeing one.
Go ahead.
My name is Lane Young. I'm with the Department of Ecology and Water Quality, and I have a question about temperature. I know that we have a TMDL on the Columbia River at this time that actually establishes 20 degrees as our goal, and I'm wondering if you can speak to whether or not you think that that's going to be sufficiently protective of the fish. And then we have a 21-degree special temperature for a standard for the Yakima River that the Department of Ecology implements. And I'm wondering if you think that is going to be sufficiently protective as well.
Thanks, Lane. Great question. Who wants to answer that?
I'll just take a stab at it, but I think annually we are over that 20C at various times. My biggest concern is the John Day Pool, the no man's land. It's a long stretch that does not have any refugia anywhere. How do we work towards that and identifying locations there? What can you do? Can you tap into the Grand Ron Aquifer and just pour water into the Columbia? I don't know. Can you turn McNary Dam into a whole host of chillers? I don't know. But those are the kind of things we're going to need to think about.
All right, I got a question from Cindy in the chat, and then Mel, I see your hand, so you're next. Cindy asks if there is any dredging done to enhance cold water refugia. Where would this sediments be taken? Bill.
So yeah, you got two choices. You take them and move them off site, or you take them and use them to take some of that shallow stuff out of play, like we did on the white salmon. I think some of the locations you might take them off site. For example, Klickitat. Could you take it and fill in Chamberlain Lake, which is a bass hatchery, it's stagnant warm pool, connected to the railroad, through the railroad. Speaking of that, we're working with Burlington Northern and CritFic to identify these culverts so we can really better assess what's coming in and out of these backwater cutoffs. So you got one of two choices, dredge remove or dredge fill. And then we understand that, there will be need for maintenance dredging to, maintain that habitat feature that you'd like to see. We want to be mindful if we dredge the mouth of the Klickitat, are we allowing warm water predators further up? We know the surface water predators like seagulls and whatnot, those juveniles will have more depth, escape depth, if we dredge that area out. But we need to be mindful of our fish predators too, and are we creating more issues there? Do you want to put in structure, complexity? Maybe not, because that then turns into bass ambush habitat in some of these areas that we might dredge. So lots of things to think about and noodle through and evaluate over time.
Wow.
Mel, you have your hand up. You have a question?
Yes, please. Great presentation, gentlemen. Thank you for all that. Bill, this one's for you. I'm wondering how you went about with your archaeological surveys with the Underwood property. That was sedimentation on top of cultural resources, and you said you were really careful not
Yeah.
to go down to native fill. We're going to be
Yeah.
doing a project, hopefully doing something very similar. So I'd love to learn how you made sure you didn't disturb what was underneath that artificial.
Yeah. So we once it was all filled in, we took Interfluve helped us, and we took probes to identify surface water, depth of fill, and then once you hit the bottom, and we basically said, for navigational purposes, we want about 7 feet at low ordinary pool. And so with that, we dredged down to that depth, which was well shy of the bottom of the native river there. So that was our Section 106 permits was such that we had to be with 3 feet above the bottom to adhere to that, so that we would not be digging up any cultural material. There could have been stuff transported downstream as a result of the blow and go, but we did look at, as we spread some of these fills out, particularly as we got towards the bottom, we were really mindful looking as we layered those across that delta. We did, do some observations, but again, it was just really like 95% sands that we were dredging up.
Thanks, Bill. Stan put a question in the chat that he read that the Yakima City Council is opposing conversion of agricultural lands in the basin to solar and wind projects. Given that the Yakima River water is already overcommitted between ag and fish, why are local officials opposed to this? I don't know. We don't have anyone from the city, but Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
I do not know why,
Yeah.
is what I'll say. And that's the
Bill,
truth. I don't know why.
Bill, I have a question. One of your slides looked like either a proposal or it showed like potential new fish arrays across the Columbia downstream of the Klickitat River. Is that for real, or is that just
Well,
like
no, those were acoustic arrays. When we did that
okay.
survival study with USGS, Dave Lindley, Nico Romero, Josette, they inserted acoustic tags into wild steelhead caught at our screw trap, and then some coho at the hatchery, and tracked them through space and time. And those arrays were out there on Menalus, and then at Bonneville, there's an array that we were able to track all the way through these fish with the tags.
Got it. Yeah. Any questions about the Bateman Island project? Hearing none. Any questions? Any other questions for any of our speakers? Well, I thought that was super interesting. We have this recorded. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel, and you can find the link to it in our newsletter or on our social media. And we'll share it out widely. It's lots of great information here. So thank you guys so much, Joe and Bill and Mike, for sharing your expertise. I know I learned a lot. So, and everybody else, thank you for coming. It's just great to see you here. We appreciate all our supporters.
And come
Thank
back
you.
in 2 weeks to learn
come
about
back
high
in 2
school
weeks.
kids.
Merritt's going to talk. It's going to be great.
I'm gonna talk.
Better luck with the slideshow.
Good night,
All right.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.
All right, bye.
Project Merit, so thank you for that.
Mhm.